Every puzzle has an answer.
After arriving at a Roman-style Colosseum and defeating a demon beast with 3 other failures, Subaru, now a child, having been transformed and physically weakened, must find a way to escape the arena. But escaping won't be easy. Every guard in the Colosseum commands witch beasts, just like the lion that took him hundreds of tries to defeat. Even if he manages to take down all of those creatures with the help of the other prisoners, it wouldn't matter because the Colosseum's owner, the governor, has a curse that activates the moment a revolt breaks out among the gladiators. As if that weren't enough, Subaru must also face off against an enemy backed by the second strongest person in the country. Welcome to the second part of Subaru Natsuki's impossible escape. Not only is he accused of a crime he didn't commit, but he also realizes he can no longer use his return by death power freely. The mass murder continued at the hands of Arakia. The poor gladiators couldn't defend themselves, even if they tried. After all, they were up against someone who didn't take them seriously. Arakia probably didn't burn the island to ashes only because Todd forbade it. If she did, recovering the curse trigger that Subaru had stolen would be nearly impossible. To make matters worse, the guards unleashed all the demon beasts held in the facility. With their horns broken, the beasts obeyed their masters without hesitation. Those who escaped Arakia ended up being hunted down and killed by the monsters. Subaru was saddened to know that the guards, people he had once tried to connect with, were now desperately searching for him, trying to kill him. He understood, though. They were driven by fear. Fear that, if they didn't find him soon, Todd would activate the island's curse against them. As Subaru made his way toward the healing room, he overheard snippets of conversations. Some gladiators were searching for him to hand him over to the authorities, while others were focused solely on staying alive. Subaru no longer knew who he could trust. He realized that avoiding the Imperial messengers and the guards wasn't enough. He'd also have to watch out for the other gladiators. Despite all his efforts to stop it, the island was inching toward destruction. He finally reached the healing room, only to realize that the door had been smashed open. A sense of dread crept over him when he saw the corpse of a winged giant rat lying on the floor next to Tanza. Despite the fact that the creature had previously caused the protagonist no small amount of trouble, the girl had taken it down on her own. But next to the rat was the corpse of Old Man Null, the doctor who had treated Subaru's wounds and made the deadly pill. Part of his head had been eaten by the beast. It seemed Tanza hadn't arrived in time. Soon after, Idra and Whites joined them. Subaru was relieved that they were still alive, even in the midst of this chaos. Yet he couldn't help but wish the situation didn't feel so hopeless. They asked him directly, had he really killed Gustav? Subaru firmly denied it and began explaining what had actually happened. But when he mentioned Todd, none of them knew who he was talking about. Subaru simply said that Todd was more dangerous than a Sin Archbishop. The room went silent at those words. They told him that he shouldn't make comparisons like that. Subaru responded that he had faced multiple archbishops before, and that was exactly why he was confident in his assessment of that soldier. Tanza replied that she wasn't surprised he had gone up against Sin Archbishops. After all, that's the kind of person he was. Subaru wondered what she meant, but before he could think too much about it, the group began to debate their next move. Escape? It could be an option, but they didn't know where the key to the room was, even if they found it. Operating the mechanism to raise the bridge and crossing it would be challenging. Fight back? Impossible. Their opponent was the second strongest person in the entire empire. For a moment, Subaru considered fleeing with only his allies, accepting that it was the best outcome he could hope for. But then he rejected that idea. That wasn't the path the son of Kenichi Natsuki would choose. Remember, at this point, the protagonist has been turned into a child physically and mentally. Adult Subaru had already overcome the habit of comparing himself to his father's accomplishments. He had found his own answer to that struggle, but that adult Subaru had vanished. The novel makes it clear that this current Subaru is finding it harder and harder to recall his past. He is becoming more influenced by his childhood self than by the man he had become. That's why he's fallen into this line of thinking. This version of him still lives in the shadow of his father and considers paths that the normal Subaru wouldn't even entertain. One possibility that Subaru considers is whether this is truly the best outcome he can achieve with his current power. Honestly, I love that this version of Subaru is approaching things from that angle because that unresolved complex will end up shifting the course of the story, as we're about to see. Then Hien tells Subaru to stop hiding it. Subaru doesn't understand, so Idra clarifies that he's talking about Subaru's father. Subaru replies that his father is just an ordinary office worker. However, Idra insists that they are talking about the Emperor of Wallachia, Vincent Wallachia. Hyain then says he's heard the rumors brought in by the newcomers, that there's currently a war in the Empire between the Emperor and his illegitimate son over the throne. There are also whispers about the appearance of the illegitimate child. It's said that the heir to the crown is a boy with black hair and black eyes. Idra then asks Subaru directly, "Is it you? Are you the one from the rumors?" Subaru looks over at Whites, who reminds him that he doesn't care who Subaru is. He just wants to lend him his strength, no matter his bloodline. Finally, Subaru understands the meaning behind Whites' words from the beginning, and he's truly grateful. His allies say they're convinced he's the Emperor's illegitimate son. They believe it because, despite his young age, Subaru has demonstrated strong leadership and survival instincts. Subaru remains silent. He knows he's not the Emperor's son. If he's made it this far, it's thanks to his own power. He then turns to Tanza and asks why she didn't try to stop the rumor, but she says she's confirmed it as well. She then reveals that she once saw the Emperor in the city of Chaos Flame alongside a black-haired woman. What Tanza doesn't know, and it wouldn't make sense to explain right now, is that the woman she saw wasn't Subaru's mother as she believes. In truth, it was Subaru himself, disguised during a military operation. Since he was transformed into a child immediately after the mission, she mistakenly believes the child in front of her is the son of that woman and the Emperor. Subaru asks Idra what's so important about him being the Emperor's son. Idra replies that there's currently an internal conflict in the Empire, led by the Emperor against his rebellious son's army. That rebellious son is none other than Natsuki Subaru. Subaru ponders this information and swiftly concludes that it's a ruse, a facade designed to obscure the truth. The real war is between the betrayed emperor and the false emperor currently on the throne. He deduces that Vincent Wallachia must have deliberately spread this rumor as a way to provide Subaru with a tool to use to reach him before the final battle. Subaru curses the emperor for using such a tactic and is stunned by how accurately he was able to foresee all of this. He suddenly falls silent, bringing a hand to his mouth. His companions remain quiet, waiting for him to speak. The text describes how the sounds of the massacre can still be heard in the background, until Tanza breaks the silence and asks what they're going to do. But Subaru stops her. In that moment, he resolves to do what's expected of him. The scene shifts to Todd's perspective. He is now in the former governor's office. He senses that something bad is about to happen, and he becomes even more certain of this as he watches things unfold slowly. He's thankful that he didn't order Arakaya to burn everything down. Searching for the Black Sphere in those conditions would have been difficult. Cursing his luck, he thinks back to the moment he saved Arakaya after she was defeated by Priscilla. He regrets it now because he had hoped that act would get him reassigned far away from this place. However, because he'd lied and claimed he'd rescued Arakia to avenge a fallen comrade, the general brought him along so she could help him with his mission. He curses the memory of his dead friend, saying that even in death, he's still a burden. Todd then reflects on the situation and on the child with the foul stench. He says he's always thought of ways to kill stronger opponents, but he's never had to think about killing a child. Now that he's turned the entire island against the child, it's only a matter of time before someone finds him. Suddenly, the two guards with him start to question whether it's necessary to turn the entire island upside down over a single child. Todd reminds them that they're only not rotting in the same cells as the gladiators because of their uniforms. They're no better than the criminals who came here. They're scum too, and they're only alive because of their roles. Todd reflects on how he doesn't care whether the Empire changes or collapses from this civil war. All he wants is to go home and protect his fiancée. Lost in thought, he recalls crossing paths with a black-haired boy beloved by the god of war who always managed to foil his plans. Subaru. Todd thinks that if this boy ends up leading an army against the Empire, he'll have no choice but to flee with his lover. Just as he's pondering this possibility, something pulls him out of his daze. Someone who isn't a guard speaks to him. It's the boy who escaped the office. He's returned with a strange group of companions. A tattooed man, a hippie, a lizard man, and a reindeer girl. Todd questions how the kid managed to get there. He doubts the boy has allies strong enough to fight their way into the office. But then the boy speaks. He tells Todd not only to surrender, but also to call off the woman. Todd tells Subaru that he has no reason to listen to him. Subaru then pulls out the curse sphere. The guards panic and reconsider their position in the fight. Todd immediately tries to calm them down, saying the kid doesn't know how to use the sphere and is just bluffing. He tells them they'd be better off trusting him, a soldier sent from the imperial capital. However, he soon realizes that his words aren't enough to convince them. It's as if they know something he doesn't. That's when the reindeer girl speaks up and clearly explains Subaru's situation. She says that the Empire is in a crisis, and the one responsible is the Emperor's son. She says this while presenting the boy. Subaru. Todd couldn't believe the story, but the guards, who had witnessed Subaru's performance in the Colosseum and heard the rumors about his identity, were completely demoralized. When the girl asked them to switch sides, Todd immediately drew his axe and beheaded his former allies. Without hesitation, he kicked their heads towards Subaru and his group. Subaru didn't understand why he'd done this. Yes, it was a grotesque scene, but it wasn't something that would kill them. Then, something crashed through the corridor walls, destroying everything in its path. It obliterated the guards' heads and struck Subaru's entire group. The narration pauses briefly to tell us about Weitz's life. He lived in Glaracia, a city responsible for supplying weapons to the Empire. When Weitz became aware of the world around him, he realized that he didn't have parents. In order to survive, he began working odd jobs in the workshop where he had grown up just to have something to eat. He didn't choose the craft of weapon manufacturing for any particular reason. It was simply the trade of his hometown. Had the city been known for agriculture, he would have become a farmer. If they had specialized in something else, he would have done that instead. Weitz was a simple man who only wanted to live a quiet, normal life. He was born alone and expected to die alone, and he was fine with that. He kept to himself, working in silence and not bothering anyone. However, because he always kept to himself, people started to see him as antisocial and eerie. That was the beginning of the end. Soon after, materials began to go missing from the workshop where he worked, and he was accused of stealing them. Since Weitz had no one to defend or vouch for him, it was easy to blame him for the crime, even though he hadn't committed it. As punishment, tattoos were engraved on his arms. In that city, it was customary to mark criminals with such tattoos so that everyone could see who had committed crimes and who hadn't. Up until that point, Weitz hadn't lived an exceptional life, but at least it had been normal. After that sentence of social death, however, that normalcy was gone. He was fired and couldn't get another job. Trying to cover up the tattoos in a hot town would only make people suspicious of him. Driven by the need to eat, Weitz was eventually forced to steal. Ultimately, he committed the very crimes he had once been falsely accused of. Curiously, even after falling into disgrace, he never managed to find someone to truly connect with. Eventually, he stopped caring about that. So long as he could survive, that was enough. Time passed, and with it, his crimes increased. The tattoos that once covered only his arms now covered his entire body. According to the laws of his hometown, he was no longer considered human. He had become something far less than human. Since he had nothing left to lose, he did something before being expelled and sent to Gladiator Island. One day, he found out who had falsely accused him of theft. That person had been the real culprit all along and had framed him to save himself. Fueled by rage, Weitz went after the man. He beat him down until the man was in tears and then tore off one of his ears. Guards had to restrain him, and when they reviewed his record, they decided to send him to the island for criminals. By then, Weitz no longer cared. He was willing to lie, cheat, and kill anyone if it meant survival. At least that's what he told himself. But deep down, all he really wanted was
ワイツ、剣を取れ。お前が頼りだ。
was to be treated like a normal person. We return to the present. Aware that something would attack them from the side, Subaru orders Weitz to intercept the head that Todd had kicked toward them with his sword. He could have asked Tanza, but despite her superhuman strength, she was still a child, and he didn't want to traumatize her. So he relied on Weitz. The moment Weitz responded to the flying head with his sword, the walls behind him shattered. A flying demon beast had arrived, tearing through the corridor where they stood. It looked as if it had been aiming for the severed head of the guard. Now, Weitz was completely isolated, face to face with Todd, a man who hadn't flinched when he learned that Subaru was the Emperor's son. Weitz knew Todd was dangerous, someone he could never afford to let his guard down around. That's why he kept his eyes on Todd, even as flying debris from the beast's sudden arrival struck him, fragments of the shattered walls hitting his body. Preparing to fight, Weitz chose to use the hand on which his first criminal tattoo had been marked. Todd immediately swung his axe to behead him. Weitz hardened his left arm and held it out horizontally, bracing to block the full impact of the incoming blade. The strike obliterated the entire left side of his body, even though he had closed the distance to Todd in an attempt to lessen the force of the swing. Weitz could attempt such a reckless tactic because he had always had the potential to be more than average. He just never had the opportunity or desire to show what he was truly made of. At least, not until now. Not until he met a child even more reckless than himself. Determined to counterattack the axe-wielding man, Weitz swung his right arm to punch him, but Todd vanished from his field of vision in that instant. The next moment, his right eye's vision widened, only to be consumed by darkness. It was as if something had crushed that entire side of his face. Suddenly, he heard someone call out to him. He turned slowly and saw that his companions had managed to avoid the beast's attack. At the same time, he saw the axe-wielding man finish off the creature by severing its head. Weitz was surprised by how genuinely happy he was that everyone was safe. His left arm throbbed with pain, and for some reason he couldn't understand. The right side of his face ached as well. He used the pain to keep himself from blacking out, though it did little to stop the feeling that his consciousness was slipping away. With his last bit of strength, he finally realized what he had always longed for deep down. Even though he had always claimed he didn't care about being ignored, he had always wanted to be treated like a normal person. He had always wanted someone to believe in him. Looking at Subaru one last time, he smiled and said that it was the first time anyone had ever told him they believed in him. Then, the strength left his limbs, and he collapsed onto the cold, hard floor of the Colosseum. Somewhere in the background, someone screamed and wept for him without pause. Hearing that made him deeply, terribly happy for some reason. Subaru watched as Weitz's body went limp and fell to the ground. He wanted to run to him and help him, but he was stopped halfway there by a pair of small arms. It was Tanza. Then the narration cut in to describe how the floor beneath Weitz's body began to crack, shattered by the massive weight of a frog-shaped demon that had landed on top of him. The creature's bulk caused the entire section of the floor to collapse, pulling Weitz's body down with it. His crushed body fell into the depths alongside the beast. Subaru could only cry out his name again. Just as he prepared to go after Weitz, Todd appeared. Completely unfazed by the situation, Todd casually explained that when a demon beast's horn is broken, the beast obeys the person who broke it. However, it will always harbor resentment and devour that person at the first opportunity. This explained all the irregularities they had seen so far, but Subaru didn't care about this trivia. He only cared about Weitz. Todd twisted the knife further by saying that Weitz had died because he cared too much about his companions. Now, broken by guilt over Weitz and the foolishness of confronting Todd unprepared, Subaru finally heard Todd say that this desperation was how a child his age should act. At that moment, Todd raised his axe and stepped forward, but Tanza stood in his way. She wasn't going to let him get any closer. Suddenly, Todd vanished from her sight and grabbed her by the thighs. He knew the girl was strong, but that meant nothing if she was thrown off the edge of the island. The narration explained how she was hurled into the void, flailing and desperately trying to grab onto anything. That's when Idra spoke up. She asked Todd if he'd lost his mind and reminded him that Subaru was the Emperor's son. But the axe-wielding man didn't care. He swung his weapon at Idra and would have hit him if Subaru hadn't pulled his ally out of the way just in time. Just as the two of them moved out of his range, Todd took the opportunity to deal with the lizard man who had been hiding nearby. His camouflage was so perfect that he had practically merged with the surrounding rubble. But that was useless, since Todd already knew exactly where he was. The narration then describes how Todd slashed at what seemed like empty space, and blood began to pour from that seemingly vacant spot. Hyeon was dead. Idra told Todd to fight him like a true warrior. Todd simply threw a knife into Hyeon's throat, replying that he wouldn't fight like a warrior because he was a soldier. Idra tried to pull the knife from his neck, but Todd followed up with an axe to the head, crushing Idra's skull. Idra's body fell beside Hyeon's. With only Subaru and Todd remaining, Todd asked if Subaru was really the Emperor's son. Subaru asked why he didn't just accept the truth. Todd said he would only bother thinking about whether that claim was true once things were firmly in his favor, like now. That way, he could weigh it properly and avoid making a mistake. Then he added that there was something else that had caught his interest. Subaru's name, Natsuki Schwartz, was oddly similar to that of an adult he had met just a few days ago. He also said that Subaru's scent reminded him of that man. Todd didn't know the truth yet, but just a few days ago, he and Subaru had clashed in another part of the country. Now, having crossed paths again, Subaru had been turned into a child. Then he adds that if this man is indeed his older brother, he would love to keep him as a bargaining chip for the next time they meet. Subaru decides to go along with the lie because he doesn't want to waste the lives that were sacrificed for him. He thinks of Gustav, Tanza, Weitz, Idra, and Hyain for a moment, and says he's surprised Todd knows his older brother. In response, Todd simply states that he doesn't like being manipulated. Without hesitation, he slams a knife straight into Subaru's heart with all his strength. The blow is so intense that it knocks the emergency pill from Subaru's molar. He can't die now. Otherwise, his allies' deaths would have been for nothing. So he pulls himself away from the scene as much as he can. But Todd presses his foot hard against Subaru's abdomen to stop him from moving and begins to count to 3. At the end of the count, Subaru raises his hands to shield himself from the strike, but the axe comes down anyway, severing the boy's hands and ending his life. Subaru had returned to an earlier moment in time, and he still remembered the feeling of his insides being torn apart by the axe's impact. However, he quickly confirmed that his body was intact at that moment. He raised his head and looked at the scene before him. He remained silent as he watched White slowly turn around and say that it was the first time someone had believed in him, only to collapse onto the cold floor of the Colosseum right after. Even if Subaru reached out his hand now, White's could not be saved. He wasn't supposed to die. Subaru wasn't supposed to die either. Things should never have reached this save point. Yet the save point kept closing in, giving him less room to escape fate. The sound of approaching footsteps froze Subaru's heart. Todd and Arakia had arrived on the island, and Subaru knew he had to do everything in his power to stop them from starting a massacre. Despite his efforts, he couldn't stop it. It still wasn't enough to prevent the worst outcome. Subaru wasn't afraid of dying. What terrified him was the reality that would follow. A reality that could no longer be changed. Now that his save point had updated, he could no longer save everyone. He saw Weitz's collapsed body. The man thanked him for believing in him just before Tanza stepped in to stop Subaru from getting any closer. The scene was repeating itself, exactly as he had witnessed it a minute ago. Suddenly, Subaru noticed the witch beast falling from the upper level. Realizing that its weight would crush Weitz, Subaru pulled away from Tanza's hand and rushed toward his fallen comrade. He wanted to pull his friend's body out of the impact zone. If he could get him to the healing room and bandage his wounds, maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. That had to be enough, right? As that hope burned in his chest and his feet carried him forward at full speed, a voice rang out behind him, saying that he was weaker than expected. Then, something slammed into his head, and the world suddenly began to spin. In that dizzying moment, he caught a glimpse of what had struck him, the blood-stained edge of an axe. As the world continued to spin, he watched the body of a boy lose momentum and crumple to the ground. That's when he realized it was his own body. Where was his head now? It didn't matter. He had to help Weitz. He had to help Weitz. He had to help Weitz. Just as the world had suddenly started spinning, it came to an abrupt stop. Subaru took a moment to recover from the wave of nausea. He once again heard his friend's voice, telling him that it was the first time someone had ever believed in him. He said this as blood poured from his left arm and right eye. This unchangeable reality struck Natsuki Subaru's soul once more, breaking it all over again. That's all for now. We're still deep into Subaru Natsuki's prison escape saga. The next part will be the last one, but if you don't want to wait, you can support the channel and get access to the full video right away. In the next episode, things won't get any easier for Subaru. Now that he's pushed his save point so far forward, he's pretty much run out of chances to reset everything. But I'd better stop before I give away any more spoilers. What did you think of this second part? See you next week.